Hey everyone, this is Cindy Lou with CHRO Partners. I'm joined with Mark with Made with a Mark, and we're going to talk today about my 5 talent management mistakes I made as a CEO. And I'm going to have Mark just basically ask me some questions. He's been a CEO as well, and let's jump right in.
So, Cindy, first off, I think it'd be really nice for people to know why. Why did you go on this adventure with CHRO Mastermind Partners and your group? And tell people who may not know a little bit about that and why you got started with that.
Yeah, so we started CHRO Mastermind groups as a really to provide a safe place for CHROs and chief people officers to get together to build work environments where employees can thrive by helping each other. And you're probably like, how the heck did you get into this business? I think to understand that, I have to back up just a little bit and tell you that when I first started this business, I actually was pretty much that CEO who didn't get it when it comes to HR. So that's what some CHROs say. They're like, oh, we have a CEO who doesn't get it, or we have a CEO who does get it. And I was definitely one of those CEOs who did not get it. And so it manifests itself in a lot of different mistakes, but ultimately, the why comes back down to I don't want CEOs to go through the same kinds of, pain. And just there were days where I hated going into the office. Like I was like the founder of this business. And I was like Sunday nights, I did not even feel like going into the office. That is the sort of the backstory. We and then you're probably like, why wouldn't you just work with CEOs directly? And I'm like, I could, but I think there's more leverage for me to help the CHROs. I think CHROs, especially of like middle market companies, are really, really underserved. We're here to provide that safe space for them to get together. But yeah, in any case, I guess the mistakes, there are really 5. I'm going to walk you through my mistake and then talk about the solution that in the talent management space that made sense. And when I talk about talent management, it's different than just HR, right? So, like Mark, you probably had HR responsibilities running a business, right? Payroll, employees getting upset, having to deal with
Being late
employee
to work.
relations. Yeah, exactly. Hiring, firing. There's the real common things that people think about when it comes to HR, but there's this whole other level of talent management that a lot of organizations don't really take advantage of or leverage. And their HR leaders are dying to share this knowledge. They're dying to share this ability to help drive business. And so I want to talk about these 5. And just stop me, Mark, if there's anything you're like, that doesn't make sense. I want to make sure that we're speaking in a language that everybody understands and not just
Absolutely.
people who are in the HR or talent management field. So the first one is hiring too fast. And this is crazy because the business I was in at the time was a professional services business focused on outsourcing the talent acquisition function for companies. So sometimes you are the barber's child, right? Even though we were doing this right for clients, when it came to your own shop, sometimes it was hard. So this was right after 9/11 that we started the business. And I don't know if you recall, but the economy like just skyrocketed. And I think when we first started the business, people are like, why are you getting into recruiting business right after 9/11? Like they thought I was crazy. But surprisingly, we had just immense growth. And because we had raised capital to support this growth, luckily we were able to hire quickly. But the consequences of hiring too quickly is that you make mistakes, right? And you don't get the right people. And in a bigger company, you might be able to make some of these mistakes, but I'll tell you what, in a startup environment, those first few hires can kill you. So we were just really lucky to have had the wind at our back when it comes to the economy, because I can see like that situation in any other type of economic environment where you just would come crashing down if your first few hires aren't really the right people. In any case, so really the solution, we were hiring too fast because we had projects to deliver on. And we're like, if we don't get people out, we're missing opportunities to build revenue. And ultimately, what we did is we implemented a talent pipelining process. And what this meant was even if we weren't hiring at the moment, we were always interviewing and we were always bringing people into the pipeline
Mhm.
to make sure that we had the talent needed. So, if any of you have ever experienced not having the right talent in your pipeline, just type in the chat talent. Yeah, type in the chat talent. And
So,
I,
Cindy, how long did it take before you started implementing that? Hey, no matter if we're in the need for personnel or not, but we're going to always put that at the forefront of everything. And so, was this months, year? What did that timeline look like?
yeah, it really wasn't for years. So we struggled along with this state for a long time. In fact, I remember some of the consequences of that were I just come home from adopting my baby girl from China.
Mm.
And we get home and we land, and the chairman's calling me and going, "We've got issues. We're missing revenue opportunities, and you need to get back in the office." And I'm like, "Holy cow." Anyways, it was a joyous time for me, but also, it was heartbreaking that I had to leave her so soon. I got my time in later, but yeah, it was quite a few years. I can't remember exactly, Mark, but before we, put this process in place. And sometime in the future, we can go into deeper dive on how that actually works. But you have to spend as a general manager, president, any hiring leader, you really do have to spend a lot more time recruiting than you think you do to get the right people because you want to make sure you've got enough people on your slate to select from versus hiring the best of the worst, right? If you don't have enough people, you just feel backed up against the wall and you're like, I got to get this revenue, I've got to get people in. And then you make those mistakes. So this talent pipelining was the solution ultimately. The second mistake was really around promotions that were made without giving our leaders the support they needed. So we were promoting people quickly because we needed a leverage. It was a professional services model. So we needed those folks to get into a spot where they could help others grow. And it was such a unique business model that we needed more leaders and we would just promote them without any development. And with some lessons learned back then where with having to let people go or we'd give them leadership development or executive coaching. And when they're in trouble, it feels like it's a punishment.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, so you feel as though one of the big mistakes was that you didn't set those new leaders up for success, possibly. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't until much later, after a few mistakes, and we're like, you know what? We need to put some leadership development programs in place. And luckily, my good friend Alita Norris in Milwaukee was able to help us. We didn't have people on the team that could do this, but we were able to bring it in house through an external source. And so, making sure that proactively the leaders who were next in line to go into leadership, we were able to get them the leadership development they needed. So, I think that the second mistake was really promoting people without the proper tools and maybe guidance, especially around leadership. And I would say this leadership development piece really made a huge difference. So, yeah, but proactively, not like in a reactive mode. Because when you do it reactively, people are like, yeah, this sounds feels like punishment. The third area was really about being purposeful about our culture. So I've been really fortunate to work from some CEOs that were masterful in putting amazing cultures together. And I guess I never really thought about it. And I just thought it's the great people you hire that make the culture up. But we were not really purposeful in identifying what our culture was. And so as a result, we didn't really know how to work together. And it would have been a kind of a hard decision to make just to dramatically try to change the culture, or it could have taken years to adjust the culture. But sometimes when you have tragedies or disasters head your way, it forces you to make these decisions quickly. After, excuse me, just gonna close this door. The puppy wants to come and play.
Right back after these messages.
So you have this business that's all working differently, right? And then in a professional services business, your margins are directly related to how busy you keep your staff. We call it bench, right? So if your bench is big, then your margins are going down. And if your margins are going down, your board starts to scream at you, and that's no fun. So we had three different offices and we'd have projects launching in one office, And the salespeople would be like, we need people, we need people. And I'm like, okay, there's people in another market you can use. And they're like, no, they don't feel like us. We don't want to use those resources. And I'm like,
So
what do you
the
mean?
culture was maybe different, the same company, but different offices, completely different cultures, maybe? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
different cultures, not necessarily in a bad way. Things were just done differently. There wasn't standardization. And I'm like, that can't work, right? Like you can't have us hire more people to the entire organization when there's resources sitting in another office ready to go. And I've heard this so often, especially in consulting type environments. So along comes 2008, 2009. It's the now we know the Great Recession. At the time, we didn't. It felt like we were on this revenue treadmill. I'm like, the board kept saying, you got to up your projections for next year. I'm like, I'm not seeing it. It's all the economists are saying this. And they're like, you can't listen to the economists. We'd all crawl under a rock. And I'm like, okay, regardless of what the economists are saying, I'm telling you, it doesn't feel like the pipeline's growing. And in fact, every day something's coming off. And so, literally, Mark, it was a really devastating time. Like we had to, in a matter of a few months, had to let go of like 60% of our staff.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't know if you remember that time, but it was in our business, especially since we were in the recruiting business, it was really devastating. So, imagine you're starting to cut in. You have those. I'd like to think that we had no C players at that point. We had no, and even very few. If we had B players, it was just because they hadn't gotten the experience yet. It's all people we loved and all people that we felt like could be part of our future. But anyways, it was tough. So we had a lot of people go. So
Now, how long was this into you talked about 9/11 and kind of things soaring, and then how
yeah,
far when was
this
this?
was like 2009. Yeah,
Yeah.
time for. By the way, I want to say hi, Allison. Thanks for popping in. Here's the deal. Okay, so then you're like, okay, so what'd you do? You had to let everybody go. Well, the silver lining in that story, sorry for the long way around this, is about culture, is around org design. So we needed to really do org design in order to not only pull the culture together, so we were able to do some things that had everybody reporting up to one VP of ops, and then all the sales people reported to someone else. And so it really helped very quickly, almost overnight, pull the culture together. I don't recommend you try this at home because I hope we never have to go through another 08, 09 timeframe ever in my lifetime or my children. But yeah, I think org design is something that we should have done sooner and we didn't, as well as being more purposeful about the culture. So, all right. The next mistake was really around me thinking that having a really flat org structure was smart. So we weren't a really big company. And I was like, we don't need all these layers of staff. And so what ultimately happened was that we had turned things around from recruiting pipelining, the talent pipelining, we're getting good people in. We had put leadership development in place. We had done some org design and we're much more purposeful about our culture. And we were just like rocking along. People are happy. They love working with each other. It truly was such a fun environment. We're winning like best workplaces awards. We were winning business growth awards, like 3-time winner of the Business Journal awards. But then all of a sudden, you saw this a situation where we had 50% turnover. Like
Wow.
we're
How do
like,
you think that is? That from
yeah,
as close to
I was like, what the heck? Yeah, it was brutal. And when you have turnover like that in a professional services firm or any firm, it really compresses your margins big time. And the board was like very upset. Our target margins were like 40% for professional services firm. We were like in the 36, 37% margins. It was pretty brutal. And so lucky for me, I had at that point assembled an advisory board that had some CHROs on it. That's a whole nother story. Really interesting and a way that CEOs, I think, could get the talent they need from a human capital perspective without bringing them all in house. Anyway, so this advisory board was like looking at our exit interview data, and they're like, look, your people love working there. They love the environment, they love their work, they love their coworkers. They just don't see a path forward. They don't
Mhm.
see what their next step is. I'm like, we have all these steps laid out. What are you talking about? They get to do more exciting work every project. We're very purposeful about that. We just never communicated it. And truly, there weren't salary bands tied to these jumps, and they didn't know what exactly they'd have to do to get to the next level. And at the time, we had our COO and our director of HR, actually Eric Moraz, who now runs his own search firm. They did an amazing job putting together career paths for our team. And I'll tell you, in 9 months, literally, we saw our turnover go from 50% down to 10%.
Wow.
Our gross margins went up to we held steady at single digits of turnover for the next 6 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, that big mistake of me just thinking nobody needs to really know what's next. We're just going to provide the great opportunities was huge. And so I guess for me, having that advice from these CHROs on my advisory board was huge. And then I was like, where were you guys, whatever, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago? Why didn't I put this advisory board together sooner? And I'll tell you, that is part of the reason that we run CHRO mastermind groups, because we want to help these CHROs have more of a voice, more confident voice, so that the CEOs can really understand how to leverage these talent management resources. I don't want any CEO to go through what I've gone through. And it gets harder and harder as you get bigger. And so some of these larger organizations that are ready to grow up and scale their business or scaling, but without all these things, it makes life sort of a miserable existence when all these things are going on. You might think that all these issues with not being able to fulfill revenue, having margin compression, right, having turnover chaos has to do with what's going on in the marketplace or just how people are today. Really, you have to look inside and say, is there something we could be doing differently as an organization when it comes to talent? So,
Yeah.
Philippe, thank you for joining and appreciate it. All right.
You
So,
said something that really hit home to me is that as far as the communication and
mhm,
realizing you knew it and you just assumed everyone else. And then that when you actually started to communicate with others, how things changed. And that's, I think
yeah,
all leaders have been there once or twice where, or many times where we thought that what we know and it's being communicated, but that's
yeah,
really, that's, that hits home. Thanks for sharing that with everyone.
yeah.
But
So,
we're
okay, the
about at
fun,
that time, but I think you have maybe one more point with.
I do. Thanks,
So yeah,
thanks
let's
for,
let's go ahead. Let's hear it.
yeah.
I think
So,
we can go a little bit beyond time.
yeah, so the final mistake, not the final, I've made many more mistakes, but the one I wanted to highlight today was making investments in talent, making investments in general, right? So at one point, right before the Great Recession, we had invested in a CEO, CFO team. Like, you guys are going to take us to the next level. At the same time, we weren't feeling right. We weren't feeling the sales pipeline expanding. It started to shrink. And there's no solution for this other than we just had to let them go because things were just coming crashing down around us, right? 60% of our sales for our whole team had to be let go. The lesson here, I actually just heard it this weekend on a course I'm taking with Brian Franklin in Lifetime Trusted Advisors program, where Brian Franklin is actually going to be at our big HR event and hosting a big workshop for us. But this was such great advice, and he said, investment doesn't create growth; it follows it,
Mhm.
right? So as a business owner, if you're like taking on investments from outside sources, to think and you think that investment's going to create growth, it won't. You got to create the growth and then the investment follows, if that makes sense. So in our situation, I know it sounds a little confusing, where we had hired the CEO, CFO team, but we didn't have the revenue that was just piling on saying, hey, we really need this team. We were anticipating the growth. I think that was one of our big mistakes. So let me just reiterate that investment doesn't create growth, it follows growth,
Mhm.
right? So you can't expect to say, hey, I'm going to hire these people and then the sales pipeline will grow. You got to make the sales pipeline grow and then add the investments in there.
Hmm.
So those are the things that I wanted to cover today. I'd love to hear your stories. Feel free to pop them in the chat. If you want to speak directly about it, that's great. If you'd like to have more conversations like this in our CHRO mastermind groups and you're a CHRO of a company over 500 employees, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Hey, great to see you, Maduri. So good to see you. All right, I'm glad that made sense to you. It's my first time saying it. Okay. Mark, we have another live. We're going to skip next week because it's a holiday week. So happy 4th to everybody, a little bit early. But we've got Amy Messersmith, the CPO, right? Chief People Officer or
Yes.
CHRO? Yeah, CPO, Chief People Officer at Builders First Source. And Amy's going to come on and be our special guest on, let's see, what is that? July
I
the
believe it's the 10th, July 10th. I'll drop the link in the chat so
okay,
that everyone has the link for
okay,
that. But that'll be
yeah,
she'll be a wonderful guest.
yeah, she's amazing. So Amy came up through PepsiCo, Yum Brands, now the head of HR at Builders First Source, ginormous public company. And when you think about trusted advisors, Amy definitely is at the top of the list. So you always will really be in for a treat when Amy joins us in a couple of weeks. All right. It's great to see you all. And thanks for helping out, Mark.
Absolutely. I'll drop that link for everyone to register in the chat for everyone. And always a pleasure, Cindy.
All right. Thanks a lot. Good to see you guys. Take care.
Bye bye.
I have to remember to turn this thing off.